Josh stood in the center of his brand new living room, raising his glass high. The chatter at the housewarming party quieted as everyone turned their attention to him. His eyes sparkled with excitement, the same way they always did when he was about to be the center of attention. "I'd like to make a toast," he declared, flashing his signature grin, "to new beginnings, new homes, and," he paused for dramatic effect, his voice lowering just enough to make everyone lean in, "to Grandpa's memory." A hush fell over the room. Just 4 days had passed since Grandpa's funeral, and the loss still weighed heavily on us all. I swallowed hard and raised my glass like everyone else, silently honoring the man who had meant the world to me. Josh set his drink down on the coffee table and cleared his throat. "Speaking of Grandpa," he continued, "I have an announcement to make." I watched as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a slightly crumpled envelope. My stomach tightened. Something about the way he glanced in my direction made my pulse quicken. "Before he passed," Josh said, his voice carrying across the spacious living room, "Grandpa gave me this letter. In it, he states that he wants me to have his vacation home by the lake, the place we all loved as kids." A wave of surprised murmurs swept through the room. My parents beamed with pride. Josh's girlfriend, Teresa, clapped her hands excitedly, but across the room, my cousin Jenna met my gaze, her eyebrows furrowed in confusion. She knew how close Grandpa and I had been. I sat frozen, my mind struggling to process his words. The lakeside cabin had been Grandpa's most treasured place. It was more than just a house. It was where he had spent years making memories, fixing up the old dock, and telling us stories by the fire. I had spent nearly every weekend there for the last 3 years, helping him maintain it, keeping him company. Josh, on the other hand, had barely visited in years. When he did, he complained about the lack of Wi-Fi, the remoteness, the boredom. It didn't make sense. Why would Grandpa give it to him? Then I remembered something. 3 weeks ago, Grandpa had handed me a small wooden box, telling me not to open it until the time was right. My chest tightened. Inside that box was a deed, one that legally transferred the cabin to me. Grandpa had already given it to me. It wasn't even part of his estate. Josh unfolded the letter and began to read aloud. I barely heard the words. My mind raced as I studied his face. Was he lying? Did he know about the deed? Had Grandpa somehow changed his mind at the last moment? I forced a smile and nodded. "That's great, Josh, congratulations." The words felt sour on my tongue. I needed to get home and check that box immediately. I stood up and muttered something about needing the bathroom, slipping away from the party. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. Something wasn't right. The letter Josh held didn't make sense. Grandpa's handwriting had grown shaky in his final months, yet the signature I glimpsed looked smooth and confident. Too confident. My phone buzzed. A text from Jenna. "You okay?" That was weird. Josh never even cared about the cabin. I quickly typed a response. "Need to check something at home. Cover for me? Say I got called into work." Within minutes, Jenna had made my excuse to the family. I slipped out the back door, unnoticed in the commotion surrounding Josh's announcement. The drive home was a blur. Streetlights streaked past as memories of Grandpa filled my mind, teaching me to fish off the dock, pointing out constellations in the clear mountain sky, laughing as I struggled to skip stones across the lake. That cabin wasn't just a piece of property, it was a piece of him, of us. Josh had never cared about any of that. His claim felt like a betrayal. As soon as I got home, I rushed to my closet and pulled out the wooden box Grandpa had given me. It was an old cigar box, worn smooth with age, still faintly smelling of cedar. "Don't open this until you need to know the truth," Grandpa had told me, his voice full of quiet wisdom. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside were several neatly folded documents, a sealed envelope with my name written on it, and a small brass key. I recognized it immediately. It belonged to the antique roll-top desk in Grandpa's study at the cabin. I unfolded the first document and my breath caught in my throat. It was a notarized deed, dated 6 months ago. Grandpa had transferred ownership of the cabin to me. My heart pounded as I picked up the letter, his handwriting shaky but unmistakable. "My dearest Jules. By the time you read this, I'll likely be gone. I wanted you to have the cabin while I was still alive, so there would be no confusion. You are the only one who ever truly loved it like I did. Your brother never cared, except when he wanted a place to host his parties." Tears filled my eyes as I read on. I know Josh might try to contest this, which is why I made sure everything is legally sound. Harold Thompson, My lawyer has copies of all the documents. The cabin is already yours. It isn't part of my will. I trust you to take care of it, to keep it the special place we both loved. My hands clenched around the letter. Josh had lied. He had faked a letter, hoping no one would question him. He had stolen Grandpa's final wishes for his own gain. My phone buzzed again, this time from Josh. Nice disappearing act. Don't worry, you can still visit the cabin if you ask nicely. I inhaled sharply. He was so confident, so smug. He thought he had won. But he hadn't. I carefully placed the documents back in the box, grabbed my keys, and checked the time. The party would still be going for another couple of hours. Wiping my tears, I took a deep breath and walked out the door. It was time for the truth to come out. I might try to claim the cabin. My mother moved to sit beside Josh, worry creasing her forehead. What does it say, honey? She asked gently. Josh hesitated, gripping the letter tightly before finally handing it to her. Read it, he said. Everyone should hear it. She adjusted her reading glasses, took a deep breath, and began. Dear Josh. If you're reading this, then Jules has opened my cedar box. That means one of two things: either I have passed away, or something has happened that made her feel it was necessary to reveal its contents. Josh, I have known you since the day you were born. I know you have always wanted recognition and validation. Maybe I failed to give that to you in the way you needed. I regret that, but I also know that when you feel overlooked, you sometimes make rash decisions that end up hurting others, and in the end, yourself. The cabin has been transferred to Jules. This was a decision I made with careful thought and love. It is not because I did not care about you, but because Jules connected with the place in a way you never did. She understood what made it special to me, and I trust her to keep that spirit alive. What you need isn't a piece of property, Josh, you need a purpose. I've enclosed a check for $25,000. Use it to start something meaningful. Maybe it's that business idea you mentioned last Christmas, or perhaps it's something else entirely. Find what makes your heart come alive the way the cabin does for Jules. I hope one day you will understand this isn't about favorites or fairness. It is about recognizing that we all have different paths in life. Jules will always keep the cabin's door open for you, I have no doubt, but your future lies in building something of your own. With love and hope. Grandpa. When my mother finished reading, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Josh sat motionless, his head bowed, his fingers gripping the check like it might slip away. He saw right through me, Josh murmured, even from the grave. My father, who had been silent, stepped forward and placed a hand on Josh's shoulder. Your grandfather was a perceptive man. Josh looked up at me, really looked at me, maybe for the first time in years. I'm sorry, Jules, he said, his voice low and rough. I had no right to try and take what was already yours. The words seemed to cost him, but they also sounded sincere. I nodded slowly, acknowledging his apology but not quite ready to forgive him just yet. There's something else in the box, I said, reaching for it again. My fingers brushed against something old and familiar. I pulled out a small, worn photo album and opened it. The pictures inside spanned years, Josh and me as kids at the cabin, building sandcastles by the lake, roasting marshmallows with Grandpa by the fire. He kept this in his desk at the cabin, I explained, flipping through the pages. He never stopped hoping you'd come around, Josh. My brother stared at the photos, his face softening, his eyes filled with regret and something else, something like longing. I really messed up, didn't I? He whispered. Yes, I said honestly, but Grandpa obviously believed you could do better. Silence settled over the room, but it was a different kind of silence. It was no longer filled with anger or tension. It was filled with thought, with realization. Jenna, who had been watching everything unfold quietly, finally spoke. So, what happens now? She asked. It was the question that hung in the air for all of us. What do you do after a moment of painful truth? How do you move forward from betrayal and revelation? I closed the wooden box, feeling the weight of responsibility Grandpa had given me, not just for the cabin, but maybe for healing our family, too. Now, I said quietly, we try to honor what Grandpa wanted for both of us. The gathering broke up soon after. My parents left, casting worried glances at Josh. They were torn between disappointment in his actions and concern for him. Jenna gave me a quick hug before heading out, whispering, "Call me tomorrow." And then it was just Josh and me. Josh moved around his kitchen, making coffee neither of us really wanted. The silence between us was thick, filled with years of competition, misunderstanding, and missed chances. "I didn't plan it," he finally said, setting a mug in front of me. "The forgery, I mean, when I found out about the deed, I was angry, hurt. I wrote the letter that same night, not really thinking I'd use it." "Then why did you?" I asked, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. Josh stared into his coffee, his voice quiet. "When everyone was here tonight, celebrating my new house, I wanted more, something bigger to announce. It just came out." He looked up, his expression raw. "I've always been jealous of what you had with Grandpa." "You could have had it too," I said gently. "He wanted that." Josh exhaled, nodding. "I know that now, but I was too proud, too stubborn to see it." He hesitated before asking, "What are you going to do with the cabin?" It was a question I had been asking myself ever since Grandpa had left it to me. "Keep it mostly the same," I said. "It needs some repairs, but I don't want to change its character." Josh nodded. "That's good, it should stay the way Grandpa loved it." I studied my brother, this person I had grown up with but sometimes barely understood. "You're welcome there," I said finally, "anytime." His eyes widened slightly. "Even after what I did?" "The cabin was meant to bring family together, not push us apart," I said. "That doesn't mean I'm not still upset, but the door is open." Josh gave me a small, grateful nod. "Thank you." As I left that night, I knew things weren't fully repaired, but maybe, just maybe, we were finally on the right path.